The Erech homeworld was a shadow of what it once was. Once a lush planet filled with sprawling forests, crystal-clear lakes, and vibrant cities, it now stood ravaged and broken. The tall, elegant towers that had once been the pride of the Herek people were now reduced to rubble. The skies, once bright and full of life, were now filled with the heavy gray clouds of smoke from constant bombardments. The beautiful bioluminescent plants that had lit the Herek cities in a gentle glow now lay scorched and lifeless. The Herek had been among the galaxy's most peaceful civilizations. They had no military, no weapons of mass destruction, no desire for conquest. Their society was built on cooperation, knowledge, and harmony with the natural world. For centuries, they had lived in relative isolation, seeking to better understand the universe and their place within it. They had developed impressive technologies, many of them based on deep, almost spiritual, understanding of the elements, but none of these were meant for war. The galaxy had seen this as weakness, and it was this very peace that made them vulnerable. The Zarek, a ruthless empire bent on galactic domination, had seen an opportunity. To them, the Herek were nothing more than an easy target, a weak link in the chain. They began their invasion without warning, and within weeks, the once thriving Herek cities fell. The galaxy watched in silence as the Herek's desperate cries for help went unanswered. The mighty galactic empires, each caught up in their own struggles, did nothing. It was then that the Herek, with no other options left, turned to the humans. The humans had proven themselves time and again to be resourceful, courageous, and fiercely protective of those they cared for. Their military had won battles against impossible odds, and their scientists had developed groundbreaking technologies that made them formidable opponents in any conflict. Though they were still a relatively young species in galactic terms, humanity's rapid ascent had not gone unnoticed. On the surface, the humans were as hesitant as anyone else. They had their own problems, their own battles to fight. Why should they risk their lives to save a species like the Herek, especially one that had no means of fighting back? But there was something about the plea they received, something in the way it was worded, desperation mingled with the faintest hint of hope, that stirred something within them. A small team of human diplomats and military personnel were sent on a covert mission to investigate. They arrived in the Herek system aboard a sleek human warship, the Icarus, its advanced cloaking technology allowing them to approach unnoticed. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, they could see the devastation firsthand. The once beautiful world now lay in ruins, the shattered remains of entire cities scattered across the surface like broken glass. The diplomats were the first to make contact. The Herek leaders, weak and weary, met them in what remained of their capital city, a place that once shone as the jewel of their civilization. The sight of the Herek, their pale blue skin, their delicate features, and the sorrow in their eyes, was a stark contrast to the hardened, battle-tested humans who stood before them. "We never wanted war," the Herek leader, a tall being named T-Loth, said, his voice soft but laced with pain. "We only wanted peace, but we've been abandoned. The galaxy has turned its back on us. We have no one left, except you." The human diplomats exchanged a glance. They understood the gravity of the situation now. This wasn't just a plea for military aid. It was a call for survival, for hope where none existed. The humans had heard many stories of weaker species being wiped out, but this felt different. The Herek, though peaceful, had a dignity about them, a quiet strength beneath the surface. Perhaps it was this that made the humans hesitate, despite their own reservations. In the days that followed, the human team worked with the Herek to understand their situation more deeply. They observed the alien species' strange abilities to manipulate the natural elements, abilities that had, until now, been of no military use. The Herek had no weapons, no advanced technology to defend themselves, but their connection to the world around them, their almost spiritual bond with the land, was powerful in its own right. Yet it was clear that even with this power, the Herek stood little chance against the might of the Zarek. Despite their fears, the humans made a decision. They would offer their help. They would not allow an entire species to be wiped out. not when there was a chance, however small, that they could make a difference. And so, the first seeds of a new alliance were sown as the humans made a promise to the Harak. They would not be abandoned. Together, they would fight back. Together, they would survive. But the question remained, would this alliance be enough to stop the Zorak, or would it be too little, too late? The first few days after the human arrival were tense, both sides unsure of how to proceed. The humans, with their advanced technology and military experience, could hardly understand the Harak's more subtle, natural approach to the world. The Harak, on the other hand, viewed the humans as strange, their machines and methods so far removed from the harmonious balance they had cultivated for centuries. But as they worked together, an unexpected bond began to form, one based on mutual respect and curiosity. The Harak were not merely peaceful, they were deeply attuned to the elements of their world. Their society had long prided itself on understanding the natural forces that governed their environment: winds, water, earth, and fire. They were not a species of warriors, but they had learned to manipulate these forces in ways that defied human understanding. At first, the humans thought it was just a cultural practice, a way of living with nature, but they quickly learned that the Harak's connection was more profound. It was a literal bond with the planet itself, a skill that allowed them to bend the elements to their will. While the human diplomats and military officers met with Harak leaders to discuss their options, a team of engineers and scientists began to investigate the Harak's unique abilities. They watched in awe as a group of Harak gathered near the ruins of a once thriving city. With barely a movement, the Harak gestured toward the earth, and the ground beneath them shifted. The crumbled walls of the city began to rise, stones lifting and aligning as if they had a mind of their own, reassembling themselves into something resembling the original structures. It wasn't magic, the humans realized. It was something far more complex, a deep, ancient understanding of the natural forces, a mastery that had evolved over thousands of years. The Harak weren't simply moving the earth, they were manipulating the very energies that powered the planet. It was an intricate, subtle power, and one that, in the right hands, could be weaponized. But despite their skills, the Harak were hesitant to use this power in the way the humans intended. "We have never fought," T-Loth explained to the human team, his eyes somber. "We are not warriors. We do not take life. Our power is meant to heal, to restore balance, not to destroy." The humans understood that hesitance, but the situation was growing dire. The Zarak were closing in on the Harak's final strongholds, and time was running out. The Harak, though able to control the elements, had no defense against the Zarak's advanced weapons or overwhelming forces. Without some form of offensive power, the Harak would be wiped out, their ancient knowledge lost forever. It was then that the humans made a proposal. They would combine their technology with the Harak's elemental power. Together, they could create new weapons, ones that harnessed the raw force of nature but were refined by human ingenuity. This was the beginning of an alliance unlike any the galaxy had seen before. The Harak were reluctant at first, but the promise of survival and the chance to defend their people eventually swayed them. It would not be easy, and it would not be without sacrifice, but they were willing to try. They agreed to work with the humans to unlock the full potential of their abilities, though they insisted they would never use their power for destruction unless it was absolutely necessary. In the days that followed, the humans began to teach the Harak basic military tactics, how to form defensive positions, how to fight as a unified force. The Harak, in turn, shared their understanding of the elements, teaching the humans how to channel the forces of nature in new and innovative ways. It was a learning process for both sides, and there were moments of frustration and confusion. The humans struggled to comprehend the subtleties of the Harak's methods, while the Harak were amazed by the efficiency and precision of human technology. But slowly, they began to build something new, a hybrid force combining technology and elemental manipulation, a force that could challenge the Zorak in ways neither species could have done alone. As the first successful tests of their new weaponry took place, the humans began to see the potential of the Harak's power in a new light. The Harak had the ability to manipulate the Earth, but with human guidance, they could create deadly shockwaves, earthquakes, and even control the weather. These powers, when combined with human technology, could provide a formidable defense, and perhaps even a way to defeat the Zarek once and for all. But even as they prepared for battle, the question lingered. Would it be enough? The Zarek's forces were vast, their warships terrifyingly advanced, and despite all they have learned, the humans and Harak knew that their greatest challenge was still ahead. For the first time in a long while, the Harak felt something they hadn't in years: hope. But hope alone would not win the war. It would take everything they had learned, and everything they could become together. As the days passed, the humans and the Harak found themselves working more closely than ever. They were united in a cause that transcended their differences, but the weight of what lay ahead was clear. While the Harak had made significant strides in learning to use their powers in conjunction with human technology, the Zarek were not waiting. The brutal invaders were massing their forces, preparing for a final push to annihilate the last remnants of the Harak civilization. The human fleet, now positioned in orbit above the shattered Harak homeworld, was a formidable sight. The Icarus, the flagship of the human contingent, loomed large, its sleek hull gleaming in the dim light of the planet's dying sun. The ship was equipped with advanced weaponry and cloaking technology that allowed it to strike from the shadows, a strategy the humans had perfected in previous battles. But despite their technological superiority, the humans knew they couldn't win this war alone. They needed the Harak's power if they were to have any hope of turning the tide. On the ground, the Harak had begun to put their newfound abilities to the test. Taloth, the Harak leader, stood atop a hill overlooking a training field where a group of young Harak were practicing manipulating the Earth. They were still learning, still honing their skills, but the results were promising. Large boulders shifted and rose into the air at the command of the young Harak, and the Earth itself trembled as the group practiced moving the landscape to their will. Though they had never used their powers for combat before, they now had the potential to reshape the battlefield. "It's a good start," Taloth said to his human counterparts, watching with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "But we cannot control the elements the way you control your weapons. The power we wield is dangerous, and we must be careful." The human officer standing beside him, Captain Elisa Reed, nodded gravely. "I understand," she said, "but the Zarek won't care about how careful we are. We need to be able to strike quickly, decisively, before they have a chance to finish what they started. The more you can control, the better." For the first time in a long while, Taloth felt a flicker of hope, but it was tempered by the harsh reality of their situation. The Zarek were relentless. In the weeks since the Harak had reached out to the humans, their attackers had already taken more than half of their remaining territory. The Zarek knew that the Harak were no longer an easy target, and they were preparing to crush them once and for all. Then, a scout ship arrived with urgent news. The Zarek had begun their final assault, and their fleet was on the move, heading straight for the last Harak stronghold, where the survivors had gathered. The humans had only a few hours before the enemy would arrive in full force. Captain Reeve knew that the time had come to put their plan into action. "We don't have much time," she said, turning to her team. "Prepare for battle. We're going to need everything we have to keep the Zarek from reaching the Harak's last refuge." The humans and the Harak immediately began coordinating their forces. The Harak's ability to manipulate the elements would be used to create massive barriers, earthquakes to destabilize enemy ships, storms to disorient and confuse the Zarek, and fire to create an impenetrable wall of flame. Meanwhile, the human fleet would strike fast and hard, using their superior technology to target the Zarek's weak points. It was a risky plan, but it was their best chance. As the humans prepared their defenses, Taloth stood once more at the edge of the city, his heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. The Harak had always believed in peaceful coexistence, in the idea that all beings could live in harmony. Yet here he was, preparing for war, the very thing he had spent his life avoiding. His people had been driven to this point not by desire, but by necessity. "I hope this works," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. For all our sakes. Captain Reed, sensing the doubt in his voice, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It will," she said, her tone resolute. "We'll fight together, and together we'll win." The battle ahead would be the true test of their alliance. But as the Zarek fleet drew closer, both the humans and the Harak knew one thing for certain. They would stand together, or they would fall together. And with the forces of nature and technology combined, they had a fighting chance. The Zarek fleet loomed just beyond the horizon, a massive cold presence that was steadily drawing closer. The humans and Harak worked frantically, knowing that every moment counted. Captain Elisa Reed stood on the bridge of the Icarus, her gaze fixed on the holographic map of the Harak homeworld. The Zarek fleet had deployed in 2 waves, one to approach the last Harak stronghold from the west, while the second would circle around from the east. It was clear that their goal was total annihilation, strike fast, strike hard, and leave no survivors. The humans had learned much in the past weeks. Together with the Harak, they had developed new weapons, blending the raw elemental power of the Harak with human technology. As Reed watched the map, she knew it was time to put their plan into action, but the stakes were higher than ever. If they failed, the Harak would be wiped from existence, and the Zarek would continue their path of conquest without resistance. Humanity's reputation in the galaxy would be shattered, their failure echoing across the stars. "We have one chance at this," Reed said, her voice steady but heavy with determination. "We'll need to hit them hard and fast. The moment the Zarek break through the outer defenses, we'll unleash everything we've got." As the human fleet prepared for battle, the Harak forces were already setting their own plan in motion. Tidloff stood at the heart of the last Harak stronghold, his hands raised toward the sky. His people had begun to understand the extent of their power, learning to wield it in ways they never thought possible. The ground beneath their feet seemed to hum with energy as the earth responded to their commands. Tidloff could feel the pulse of the planet's heart in his bones, the rhythm of life itself flowing through him. The Harak had always been at one with the earth, but now, with the humans' help, they had learned to push their abilities further. The wind whipped through the air, carrying with it a surge of energy, as if the planet itself was preparing for the coming battle. The Zarek would face more than just their usual weapons. They would face a force of nature that had been dormant for centuries, awakening now to protect its people. "We are ready," Tidloff said, his voice reverberating with a quiet strength. "The earth will rise to meet the enemy." Just as the Zarek fleet entered the atmosphere, the ground beneath them trembled. Without warning, massive tremors shook the battlefield, sending Zarek ground forces into disarray. Entire sections of their advancing fleet were tossed off course as the Earth itself shifted beneath them. The Harak's ability to manipulate the planet was no longer a myth. It was a reality, and it was a powerful one. Above, the human fleet engaged the Zarek's warships. With pinpoint accuracy, the humans unleashed a barrage of plasma fire and missile strikes, targeting weak points in the Zarek's hulls. The advanced human weaponry cut through the Zarek's defenses like a hot knife through butter, sending sparks and debris flying in every direction. The humans were quick, efficient, and devastatingly effective. But the Zarek were not easily deterred. Their ships retaliated with brutal force, sending waves of energy blasts toward the Icarus and the other human ships. The air was thick with smoke and fire as the battle raged in orbit, and below, the Harak were relentless in their defense. Lightning crackled across the sky, striking down Zarek ground forces in arcs of electric fury. The Harak were no longer passive. Each pulse of elemental energy carried the weight of a species determined to survive. However, as the battle intensified, both sides began to realize that the true power of the combined human Harak forces lay not in their weapons alone, but in their unity. The Harak brought their knowledge of the elements, their deep connection to the earth and sky, while the humans contributed their technological might and tactical brilliance. Each force complemented the other, and together they were becoming more than just the sum of their parts. Yet, despite their successes, the Zarek remained a formidable enemy. Their warships adapted quickly, deploying countermeasures that neutralized much of the human firepower. Their ground forces, though weakened, were still a massive threat. As T-Loth and his people continued to manipulate the elements, the humans launched wave after wave of attacks, each one more daring than the last. "We need a breakthrough," Captain Reed muttered under her breath as she watched the battle unfold. "We can't keep fighting them like this. We need to hit them where it hurts." T-Loth, sensing her resolve, nodded. "Then let us do what we must. Together." And with that, the combined forces of humanity and the Harak launched their final assault. The ground shook with the force of the earth rising up to meet the enemy, while the sky lit up with the fury of storms. In the heart of the battle, the humans and the Harak found something even more powerful than their weapons: the will to protect everything they loved. But even as the Zarek faltered, one question lingered. Would this gamble be enough to break their enemy's will? Or would it all come crashing down? This section emphasizes the turning point in the battle, highlighting the growing strength of the alliance and the desperation of the situation. The combined forces of the humans and the Harak are now actively fighting the Zarek, but the stakes are incredibly high. Would you like me to continue with the next part, or do you have any adjustments in mind? The battle had reached its peak. The sky above the Harak homeworld crackled with intense energy, both from the storms summoned by the Harak and the relentless barrage from the Zarek warships. On the surface, the ground was shifting with violent tremors as the earth responded to the Harak's call, creating massive walls of stone that rose up like jagged teeth from the ground, blocking the Zarek's advance. The human fleet fought with precision, using their superior tactics and technology to target weak points in the Zarek ships, but the Zarek were relentless. Their sheer numbers and advanced weapons were a challenge unlike any the humans had faced. Captain Elisa Reed gripped the command console of the Icarus as the battle raged. The ship's shields flickered under heavy fire, and the crew worked furiously to keep the ship operational. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the lives on her shoulders. Every second counted. "Status report," she called, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Shields at 40%, Captain," Lieutenant Marcus Lee responded. "We've lost 2 of the secondary engines, and the Zarek fleet is pushing forward. If they break through the defense line, we'll be sitting ducks." Reed's eyes narrowed. She knew the humans couldn't keep this up forever. The Zarek were overwhelming, and the human fleet had already taken significant damage. Without reinforcements, they wouldn't last much longer. Yet there was a quiet confidence in her that refused to accept defeat. "We need to give the Harak more time. We're not backing down now." Below, in the ruins of what had once been the heart of the Harak capital, T-Loth stood with a group of his people, guiding them through the final stages of their plan. Their powers had grown stronger, but so had the Zarek's attacks. The Harak were digging deeper into the planet's core, channeling its most powerful forces in a final attempt to turn the tide. The earth trembled violently, and a low hum filled the air as the ground beneath the Zarek forces began to shift in a way they hadn't expected. Large fissures appeared in the earth, swallowing entire Zarek units, and the sky above them began to darken further. A massive storm, unlike anything they had faced, rolled in, with thunder so loud it sounded like the planet itself was roaring in fury. Loth's hands moved in slow, deliberate gestures as he connected with the core of the planet. The energy in the air became palpable, thick, and heavy. The Harak had always known the Earth as a nurturing force, but now they had turned it into their weapon. "We will not fall today," T-Loth whispered, his voice filled with the gravity of their situation. On the battlefield, the humans and Harak pushed forward, their unity growing ever stronger. Human soldiers supported Harak warriors who controlled the elements, standing side by side. The once peaceful Harak now fought with a fury they had never known, and the humans, though outnumbered, fought like lions defending their home. The Zarek fleet above began to falter, their advanced shields weakening under the combined assault of the human firepower and the unpredictable storms below. A massive Zarek warship, the flagship, moved to take the lead, sending out waves of laser fire. The Icarus dove into the fray, moving quickly, evading incoming fire, and sending precision strikes toward the vulnerable points on the flagship's hull. "We need to disable their flagship now," Reed ordered. "That ship controls their entire fleet. If we take it down, the rest of their forces will be lost." The human fleet surged forward with renewed purpose, and the Harak used their powers to amplify the assault. Loth, still connected to the core of the planet, summoned all his strength to direct an earthquake that sent shockwaves through the Zorak warship. The ground cracked open beneath the ship's thrusters, destabilizing it and sending it spiraling toward the planet's surface. But it wasn't enough to bring it down entirely. As the Zorak flagship continued its descent, it launched one final counterattack. A blinding pulse of energy shot out from the ship, striking the Icarus and sending it careening off course. Reed's heart skipped a beat as the ship rocked violently. "Damage report," she shouted. "We've lost primary engines, Captain," Lieutenant Lee replied, his voice strained. "We're drifting. Shields are offline." Reed gritted her teeth, but there was no panic in her eyes. "We're not out of this yet. Brace for impact." The battle in the sky raged on, but it was clear that the tide had turned. The Zorak flagship had been crippled, its forces in disarray. The storm, combined with the Harak's elemental power and the humans' technological might, was beginning to overwhelm the invaders. The ground forces were retreating, and the Zorak fleet was starting to scatter. Loth's voice rang through the communications channel, his words filled with relief and determination. "This is not the end. We will rebuild. Together, we will rise again." As the Zorak fleet began to retreat into the void, the humans and the Harak stood victorious, together, against impossible odds. But even as the immediate threat faded, both knew the war wasn't over. The Zorak might have been driven back, but their reach was vast. This victory was only the beginning. They had proven they could stand united, but they would need to prepare for the long fight ahead. The battle had been won, but the cost was apparent. The once thriving landscape of the Harak homeworld was now scarred by the remnants of war, cratered earth, shattered structures, and the husks of destroyed Zorak warships scattered across the planet's surface. The air still hummed with the energy of the storms that had raged through the atmosphere, and the ground trembled with the lingering echoes of the planet's deep power. The humans and Harak stood together, surveying the battlefield in the aftermath. The Zorak had retreated, but they would not forget this day. Captain Elisa Reed stood at the edge of a vast crater, looking out over the ruins with a heavy heart. She had fought many battles in her career, but this one felt different. There was a bond here, something she hadn't expected when she'd first arrived on this world. The Harak had lost so much, yet they had fought with a strength she hadn't thought possible. Loth approached, his eyes somber as he looked out over the damage. The earth beneath his feet had calmed, but the scars left by the battle were visible, a painful reminder of what had been lost. The Harak had fought with everything they had, and they had survived. But survival came at a cost. "We have driven them away," he said softly, "but at what cost? Our land, our people, so much has been destroyed." Reed turned to him, her expression resolute. "You've lost a lot, I know, but you still have a future. You fought with courage, and you stood strong. That's something they'll never take from you." Loth nodded, though his gaze remained distant. "We will rebuild, but it will take time. The Zorak, they will return. They will not forget this defeat." Reed was silent for a moment. She had seen enough of the galaxy's conflicts to know that the Zorak would not easily be deterred. "We'll be ready for them," she said, her voice steady. "But you're not alone in this anymore. We're not leaving. You had our word." A quiet resolve passed between them. The humans and Harak had forged an alliance, and it had held. Together, they had proven that even the most powerful forces could be driven back, that unity and determination could overcome even the darkest odds. But the reality was clear. The Zorak would be back, and they would not be as easy to defeat next time. Elsewhere on the battlefield, the survivors of the conflict were tending to their wounded. The Harak had lost many in the fight, and the human soldiers were no different. Despite their technological advantage, no one had been spared from the brutal nature of war. But the worst was over. The sounds of combat had faded, and now only the quiet hum of rebuilding remained. "We'll need to fortify the remaining strongholds," Captain Reed said, speaking with a few of her officers. "We can't let our guard down. This was just one battle, and the war isn't over." "We'll help," one of the Herrick leaders replied, stepping forward with a look of determination. "You've shown us that there is strength in unity. We will stand with you." Theloth joined them, his gaze shifting from the horizon back to Reed. "Together, we will find a way to defeat them once and for all. The Zarek may have tried to take everything from us, but we will not let them succeed, not while we stand together." The humans nodded, knowing that their fight was far from finished. The Zarek had been a formidable enemy, but the bond they had formed with the Harak had given them a fighting chance. The combined might of the humans' technology and the Harak's elemental power had been enough to turn the tide. This time. But as Reed and Theloth spoke, the reality of the situation was clear. The Zarek were a vast empire, and this victory was just one small part of a much larger war. The humans and the Harak would need to remain vigilant, strengthening their alliance, preparing for whatever came next. "We'll rebuild," Reed said, her voice firm. "And when they come back, we'll be ready." The battle had been a victory, but the war was far from over. And as the sun began to set over the Harak homeworld, both the humans and the Harak knew that their fight for survival was just beginning. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, no matter how daunting they seemed. They had proven that even the most unlikely of allies could become the strongest of forces. Weeks had passed since the victory, and the Harak homeworld was slowly starting to heal. The scars of war remained, but the combined efforts of the humans and the Harak had begun to restore what had been lost. Construction teams, both human and Harak, worked side by side, rebuilding cities, reinforcing defenses, and reinforcing the fragile unity they had formed. Yet, despite their best efforts, the shadow of the Zarek still loomed large. On the human flagship Icarus, Captain Elisa Reed sat in her command chair, scanning the latest reports. The Zarek had not made another full-scale assault yet, but all intelligence pointed to one thing. They were regrouping. They were learning from their losses. It was only a matter of time before they came back in full force. "Captain, the latest scans indicate significant Zarek fleet movement near the outer rim," Lieutenant Marcus Lee reported, his voice filled with urgency. "They're mustering their forces, but we can't tell how many ships are in play yet. Our sensors are being blocked." Reed frowned, her mind racing. The Zarek had been quiet, but their silence was more ominous than reassuring. They were preparing, and that meant they would strike again. The humans and Harak had been given a brief respite, but they could not afford to become complacent. "We need to be ready," Reed said, standing up and walking toward the tactical console. "This next wave will be harder. They're not going to underestimate us again. We'll need to keep the element of surprise on our side." Back on the Harak homeworld, Theloth stood in front of a vast table covered with maps and data displays. His people had never been warriors by nature, but the brutal reality of their situation had forced them to adapt. The Harak were no strangers to the rhythms of the earth, to the cycles of life and death, but they had always relied on peaceful coexistence. Now, they were preparing for war. "We must strengthen our elemental defenses," Theloth said to the gathered leaders. "The Zarek are not just an enemy of our people, they are an enemy of all life. If we are to defeat them, we must push the limits of our power. We cannot afford hesitation." One of the younger Harak stepped forward, her face etched with determination. "But Theloth, the Earth can only give us so much. We've seen what the Zarek can do with their technology, their weapons." "I know," Theloth interrupted, his voice hardening. "But we have learned much from the humans. Their technology and our abilities. Together, we can create something that will give us a chance. We must push forward. Time is not on our side." The room fell silent. Every Harak in the room knew the stakes. The Zarek weren't just invaders. They were conquerors, driven by a ruthless desire to dominate. They had crushed civilizations before, and there was nothing to suggest they wouldn't do the same to the Harak. But now, the Harak had a powerful ally in the humans, and together, they would face the Zarak with everything they had. As Teloth continued to speak with his people, Reed was preparing the next phase of the human strategy. She had called in reinforcements, ships from other human colonies that had yet to be directly touched by the Zarak. They would need all the firepower they could get, but the most important piece of the puzzle wasn't just in numbers. It was in knowledge. Reed paced the Icarus Bridge as she spoke with her officers. We need to figure out where they're going to strike. We know they're rebuilding their forces, but we don't know their objective. We need intel on their command structure. Any ideas? Lieutenant Lee paused, typing furiously at his console. There's something strange about their fleet movement. They're not moving in the typical formation for a direct assault. It looks like they're setting up a trap. But for what? Reed's eyes narrowed. The Zarak were cunning. They didn't just attack, they planned. And if they were planning something more elaborate than a simple invasion, then they would need to be ready for anything. We can't wait for them to make the first move, Reed said, her voice calm but full of purpose. We're going to take the fight to them. We need to find their fleet and intercept it before they're fully prepared. If we can disrupt their command structure, we might just have a chance. The next few days were a blur of preparation. The humans and Harak continued to strengthen their defenses, working in tandem to create new weapons, new strategies, and new ways to harness the power of the Earth. Teloth's people had begun experimenting with amplifying their elemental abilities, learning to combine their power with human tech in ways that were still in their infancy. But every success was a step forward, and every breakthrough brought them closer to the moment when they would face the Zarak head-on. The uncertainty of what was to come hung heavily in the air. Every plan, every decision felt like a gamble. But as the humans and Harak stood united, there was one thing they knew for sure. They would face the storm together. They had proven that the Zarak could be driven back once, and now they had to prove that they could finish what they had started. The storm was coming, and this time they would be ready. The final days before the Zarak's anticipated assault were filled with preparation. The combined forces of the humans and the Harak had worked tirelessly, forging a defensive line that stretched across the most critical points of the Harak homeworld. The collaboration between the two species had become seamless. Technology and elemental power had fused together in ways neither had ever imagined. They were no longer separate forces, but one unified force standing together against a common enemy. Captain Elisa Reed stood on the bridge of the Icarus, gazing at the holographic map of the battle zone. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. The Zarak were on their way, and every moment counted. Report, she said to her officers. Zarak fleet located, Captain. Lieutenant Marcus Lee replied, his voice tense. They're massing just outside the system's outermost edge. Their fleet is large, but they're moving in irregular patterns. It's like they're waiting for something. Reed frowned. Waiting for what? Before Lee could answer, the comms officer spoke up. We've received a transmission from the Harak. Teloth requests an immediate meeting. Bring him up, Reed ordered. Moments later, Teloth's image appeared on the holographic screen, his expression as solemn as ever. The Zarak are not acting like they're preparing for a standard attack. Teloth said, his voice grave. Our scouts have reported something strange. They're gathering around a point in space near the galaxy's core. It looks like they're building something massive. Reed's heart skipped a beat. A weapon. Teloth nodded. I believe so. It is likely a weapon of unimaginable power. If they finish constructing it, they could use it to wipe out entire star systems. We cannot let that happen. The gravity of the situation hit Reed hard. The Zarak weren't just invading. They were attempting to reshape the entire galaxy to their will. If they succeeded in activating this weapon, it could mean the end for both the Harak and humanity, along with countless others who might fall in their wake. We'll have to destroy it, Reed said, her voice unwavering. Teloth agreed. Yes, but we must act quickly. We can't allow them to complete it. The two forces now had a clear objective: to stop the Zarak from completing their weapon, no matter the cost. As Reed ordered her fleet into position, the Herak warriors prepared to use their elemental powers in ways they hadn't dared before. The skies above the planet began to darken as Teloth rallied his people, urging them to focus their powers on a single devastating strike. The final battle would take place in the heart of space, near the Zarak's weapon site. The human fleet moved first, cutting through the blackness of space with precision. The Herak followed, their ships cloaked by the Earth's natural energy, blending into the stars themselves. Together, they would strike when the time was right. As they neared the Zarak's location, the full scale of their weapon became apparent. It was an enormous construct, a ship unlike anything Reed had ever seen, bristling with energy signatures and strange, alien technology. The Zarak were preparing to launch it into hyperspace, likely targeting the core of their galaxy. The Icarus and its allied ships made their approach, cloaking devices activated, slipping into the Zarak fleet's blind spot. But the Zarak had anticipated this move. As the ships closed in, energy cannons fired from the weapon, disrupting the ship's cloaking shields. It was a direct hit. The Icarus shook violently as the shields flared, but it held together. "This is it," Reed said, her voice steady. "Break through their defenses. Target the core of that weapon. It's our only shot." The humans and the Herak made their move together. The Herak's elemental abilities surged forward, creating enormous fissures in space itself, weakening the Zarak's defense systems. Lightning surged across the battlefield, channeled by the Herak's power. The human ships fired in perfect synchronization, targeting the energy sources powering the Zarak weapon. As the battle raged, Teloth's voice came through over the comms. "The weapon is destabilizing. We must destroy it now." With a decisive push, the Icarus fired its final shot. The energy beam hit the core of the weapon, causing an explosion that rocked the entire fleet. A burst of light and fire erupted as the Zarak weapon disintegrated in space, sending shockwaves through the surrounding fleet. The Zarak flagship, caught in the blast, was torn apart, and with it, the remaining Zarak forces scattered. The Zarak's once imposing fleet began to retreat, their forces in disarray. The humans and Herak had dealt a devastating blow. In the aftermath, as the debris of the Zarak fleet drifted into space, Captain Reed stood on the bridge of the Icarus, staring at the stars ahead. There was a heavy silence in the air, a quiet that only came after a battle that had decided the fate of worlds. "We did it," Lieutenant Lee said, breaking the silence. "Yes," Reed replied, her voice quiet. "We did. But the war isn't over. The Zarak will rebuild. But we've shown them that we can fight back. Together." Back on the Herak homeworld, Teloth gazed up at the sky. "This battle is won, but the fight for our future continues. Together, we will stand." The alliance between the humans and the Herak was solidified, their shared victory a testament to the strength of unity in the face of overwhelming odds. The galaxy, once threatened with destruction, had been given a second chance. But one thing was certain: whatever the future held, they would face it together.